Bolivia is the only country in the Western Hemisphere with a majority of indigenous persons.
Okay.
Yet they have experienced genocide, enslavement, and oppression for over 400 years by the descendants of the conquistadors, which arrived in the 16th century. This podcast series is about that painful history of the indigenous people and their struggles to gain equality, justice, and dignity in Bolivia. And it tells the story of the Iglesia Evangelica Metodista in Bolivia and its fight to gain autonomy from the sometimes cultural elitism of the U.S. United Methodist Church. I will share some of the good and the bad stories of the U.S. foreign missionaries to the indigenous. In 1976, there was an indigenous Aymara Revolution in which the indigenous wrestled control of the IEMB from the U.S. missionaries and the Hispanic elite in Bolivia. It became a truly indigenous church. And the IMB then became a center for working for human rights for the indigenous people of Bolivia and suffered arrest, torture, and martyrdom at the hands of right-wing dictators resisting equality for the indigenous people of Bolivia. This series tells the stories of some of the heroes of that movement and the sacrifices they made in being tortured and executed to help bring equality and justice to the indigenous people of Bolivia, and the impact they had on indigenous movements throughout South America. I've asked His Excellency Bishop Eugenio Poma to speak about the impact of the Iglesia Evangelica Metodista in Bolivia on the fight for human rights and justice for the indigenous peoples of Bolivia, and on their impact on the indigenous movements throughout South America. Allow me to give a quick introduction to Eugenio Poma. I'm going to do about 3 podcasts on his amazing, amazing life story. You're going to want to hear it. It's really good. But for now, just allow me to hit the highlights. Eugenio Poma began his life as a peon in the near slavery conditions of the hacienda that was run and controlled by a Hispanic patron. He became a Methodist and was educated by the church and became perhaps the second indigenous person in the history of Bolivia to get a high school diploma. He then got a chance to get a university education in the United States. When he was offered a job to stay in the United States, Eugenio and his family turned it down because, as he said, "Our place is with our people." And they returned to Bolivia. He became the headmaster of a Methodist school in the small Bolivian town of Ancaramas and worked on voter education and community organization of the indigenous people. During a military coup in 1980, he was hunted by the military because of his promotion of indigenous and democratic ideals, but he managed to avoid arrest. Another great story that you will hear later on. And in 1985, he was elected to become the second indigenous person to become a bishop of the IMB, even though he was a lay person. And that's another great story that we'll share. In doing that, he became one of the few indigenous leaders of a nationwide organization in Bolivia. Despite the indigenous population being the majority of the people in Bolivia, there were only 3 national organizations that were led by indigenous people: the Miners' Union, the Peasants' Union, and the Methodist Church. Bishop Poma became an outspoken leader for indigenous rights during this time and managed to avoid an assassination attempt on his life. In 1990, Bishop Poma retired from the episcopacy and moved to Dallas, Texas, where he went to Perkins School of Theology, where he was both a student and an adjunct professor at the same time. And in 1993, he returned back to Bolivia. In 1995, he was hired by the World Council of Churches to be a consultant on the indigenous people's rights around the world. This led him to visiting indigenous people all over the world, and he became a spokesperson for the indigenous people of the world at the World Council of Churches and through his participation with the United Nations. His purpose there was primarily to be a facilitator at both the UN and at the World Council of Churches for the sharing of the needs and the unique situations faced by indigenous people around the world. In December 2005, thanks in part to the voter education by the Evangelical Methodist Church of Bolivia, Bolivia elected the first indigenous person to become a leader of a country of the Western Hemisphere since Columbus. The newly elected president called Eugenio to become the Bolivian ambassador to Denmark. Denmark is the country which provided the most foreign aid to Bolivia at the time. He was chosen because the new indigenous president was trying to bring in as many indigenous people into the government as possible. And Eugenio had the most experience in international relations of any Bolivian Aymaran because of his time with the World Council and with the United Nations. So I want to welcome His Excellency, Bishop Eugenio Poma. Thank you for being with us today, Bishop. Thanks a lot for being here.
Wow. Thank you.
I'm excited to have you here and to be a part of the podcast. Bishop, what is your opinion as an indigenous leader of the United Nations setting aside a day to recognize and celebrate all the world's indigenous people? What's your thoughts about today, August 9th?
Well, it's kind of two ways to think about it. Well, so many years we have as indigenous leaders or indigenous persons thought that we could gain our pride, self-esteem, our history, our values. Then, although the United Nations has decided to do so for many years since 1980s, until recently declared the draft declaration as an official standard for the indigenous peoples, I have my double understanding. Why does it take so much time to recognize ourselves? I'm talking for the indigenous people and for non-indigenous people, because I think this recognition, I don't want to say it's too late, it is okay, but why does it take so much time? And why doesn't it take the changes that it should happen for the indigenous peoples? I'm now talking like an indigenous person. Still, it's the country's policies, still is the cultural manifestations, still is saying there is one culture in the world, which is the globalized culture, which is Western rooted. And there are good and bad things in every culture, but today the world still says the best or the good is the Western rooted cultures, Western ideal things, either we politics or policies or ideal of democracy, whatever. However, we are so many millions in the world still forgotten in some places in the world. I have been, while I was in the World Council of Churches, I visited countries like Norway, Sweden, Canada, Alaska, or Oceania, or Australia. There's indigenous people living in rich countries, but their rights are not respected. So these people that still are saying, this is who I am in this situation, and this is who I am on the other situation. I've seen that in my time when I was in World Council of Churches, and I think still today is. However, today in Bolivia, it's kind of different too. Two opposite sides are fighting. The Western and the original natural way of looking or facing life. Maybe it is good because sometimes we have to be together. So in this day of International Day of Indigenous Peoples, we have to think that we should continue strengthening the relationships in equal basis between people, to culture, languages or tradition, whatever, in equal conditions. Can we try at least? And I don't think we are trying. We still trying to say, I'm stronger than you, you obey me. You impose still is continuing. So when I think on this day, August, a special day, what we should celebrate, at least there is a minimum thing to be contact, continue your journey together, dialogue and discussing, debating, and rearranging the construction of the new world that everybody expect, either indigenous, non-indigenous, wherever we are.
Do you think is it a cultural elitism, racism, or what do you think is leads to the resistance to including the indigenous people and the indigenous cultures by the majority?
Okay, the majority of today, I think it is the custom. There are different things, but I think I would say the main thing is the way you look at your culture. I think it is, my father used to say, we're never going to win the patrons. They're stronger than us. And if they are stronger than us, you have to be careful. Don't say things easily. You have to watch out all the ways they are. Don't you just say that your right is correct and to put it in your ideas there. Among us, it's okay. I think that is what is existing. Among indigenous, we're okay. I mean, we make jokes, we can tell each other, but when we are with the other, you keep quiet. And I think it is the time that everybody should be speaking together and everyone should respect each other. I think respect is not, it's not there. We still are thinking, even the indigenous people who are highly educated sometimes think they're already white, because the white tendency still remains stronger today in many places of the world, and especially among the indigenous people. Now, I don't want to say white because the darker face could still be the white culture, which thinks they have the right.
Where do you find our, when I think of indigenous people, I of course think of South American. I think of Native Americans in North America and Africa. But where do you find indigenous people? Are they everywhere in the world, or?
Okay, thanks to the World Council of Churches, I had the opportunity to visit Alaska, Canada, North America, Europe, Asia, even Australia, and all those islands all over the world. And there are many, you could say, kinds of indigenous peoples, different ideals, nations, and all that, and they're all over the world. I don't know, the statistics says we must be about 350 or to 400 millions as a persons in the world. Others, like Samis, are more whiter than we are, darker, or the Africans not much darker, and all that. Yeah. But we are now. What is that makes us indigenous? So that's what it is that identifies. I would tell a story too sometime, but Sami people, for example, I would visit them and says, we are with a Lutheran church and we're supposed to be like Lutherans and with all the things, and like a Western custom and all the Christian things. Then we go back to their homes on Samis. It says, we are Samis now, we are indigenous now, we're gonna eat the way we eat and the way we share. So here we comes, and then one thing that happens for me, it says, for instance, please have a nice food to me. And they give me 2-3 bars of bones. Oh my God. What does this mean? I mean, I said, well, in me, I'm not saying anything, but in me, I'm thinking, oh my God, they eat bones. Yeah. Then suddenly one elder comes and says, you're supposed to suck the bone because the marrow of the bone is it's healthy and it's the best thing you have, and you eat that. Oh my God. And then so I was sucking my bone and all that. So that is the difference. These people becomes indigenous as indigenous themselves there.
Yeah.
But when you are together with the others, so such cultures, such traditions, ways of life are different in different parts of the world too. Either we, in Fiji, for instance, in Fiji, the indigenous people eat a lot, and they eat strange things, all kind of things. So it's all over the world. It's wherever we go, there's indigenous people.
What are some of the common problems that indigenous people around the world are facing, or is each one unique? Is each one have their unique problems?
Okay. We understand that the most important thing in life for life is the land or the earth, the water, the air, or the heat of the sun, and all that is related for life. That is the most important thing. Today, or when I was at the World Council of Churches, or today still continues, the disposition of the land in which they live. One thing. And when that land is taken away, it costs to the indigenous peoples the main source of life, culture, relationships, whatever we think about it. This is the main issue that's happening. Second thing, their way of communication, which is in their own languages. The languages are already getting lost by hundreds, I guess, today. My people, Aymaras, for instance, the younger generations do not speak the language anymore. However, educational things are saying that you should speak. Now, not only the Aymaras or the Quechuas or the Mayas is happening, maybe all over the world that is happening, that trend to be globalized in many things. The other thing that is very much impacting is because the other cultures are not staying there, they're coming into the territories, and the culture is changing, the traditions and the beliefs are changing. And the church is one of them. And I remember a long time ago when I visited to one of the churches, and I said, I represent the World Council of Churches, blah, blah, blah. And they said, we don't like the churches because the churches are taking away our lands and they built their churches, and we have no place to plant for our food. Oh my gosh, but we're not that kind of churches that we take away. Of course, in the history it happened that, and it happens perhaps today too, still continues happening in the world. So those are the dangers or that affects us into living things. And the younger generation is confused which one they're gonna go. And I think lacks the education of empowering their culture and the more relationship into who they are and their history and the vision from them. And then, of course, we have to mix today. There's not easy way to get away. With a TV, with this kind of a technology, gosh, we have the impact of it. So those are the things that we have to be careful.
How do you build empowerment and identity in an indigenous culture? I mean, how do you go about that process? You talked about the importance of empowerment and dignity. How do you go about that process of doing that?
Yeah, well, now this is a real challenge because I remember. Let's remember let's remind us what the invasion came, the conquest. The conquest said to us, we were less than human beings. We're just like animals, savages. So we didn't know how to speak, we didn't know how to eat, we didn't know nothing to do for them. So they brought us into us, well, your name is gonna be this, or you're gonna eat this way, you're gonna be speaking this way, all kind of things. Today, in some way that is happening. Today you should speak English, for instance. If you don't speak English, it's no good because otherwise you'll be trouble. which is good too. I mean, you can communicate with them.
Yeah.
Okay, but in the past, that's what happened. However, there's signs that is happening. I thought that would happen more in Mexico or more in Guatemala, but it happened in Bolivia. In Bolivia today, who has an Aymara name or Aymara culture or Aymara or Quechua culture, it's well accepted. You even say, I am Quispe, or I am Mamani, or I am Baba. Before, you couldn't say that. You have to say, I'm Morales, or I am Peñaranda, or I am somebody. So you have to change your names, your surnames.
Yeah.
Today, it's the other way around, which hopefully will not lead to another kind of a confrontation, but I think it would lead to respect, to be proud of yourself, even in your names, and even in your culture. The culture in Bolivia is kind of a mix too. Gosh, we live because the culture in Bolivia is more indigenous oriented, indigenous rooted. All those dances, a lot of things move around it. Food, alcoholic, beer, dressmakings, musical, and gosh, there's a movement economy there. Today, with this pandemic that we're facing, it's dead. Nobody's doing anything. So we have to relearn, we adapt again. So I think the identity problem in some places, like in Bolivia, maybe it happens in Guatemala and Mexico too, it is becoming to be strengthened, and the governments should strengthen the identity of the persons, of the cultures, of the peoples too. So in the past, and in the case of Bolivia, we have lost much. We are regaining in Bolivia, I think.
What was the role of the IMB in that process? Because I know that when I first came in 1986, that conflict was still very strong between the urban elite, Hispanic elite, and the indigenous. And what role did the IMB play in bringing the Methodist Church play in bringing that a sense of dignity and quality and all the things that you just talked about in terms of language and culture? What was their involvement in that awakening?
Yeah, when we look back to the history of the Methodist Church in Bolivia, obviously there are two ways we look to it. If the Methodist Church of USA didn't come, we don't know who would be as a Methodist today. That's one thing. Before 1906. 1905, 1906, and before that, there's missionaries from Chile, from Argentina, came here, all that. And then American Institute, this Harrington came, but they mostly were for the elite people at that time. The elite had the school and good services until 1930s, when one of the missionaries decided to have something on the Lake Titicaca in comparison with the Baptists in the Lake Titicaca too. That's why they came to what it is now, Ancoraimes or Camata. And here we appear with indigenous leaders like Cipriano Titirico, fighting for education, blah, blah, until 1940 and 50s. So it's a long process of the Methodist Church, part of the mission and part of the Bolivian leadership together, trying to do something for these indigenous persons, Aymaras in those areas. Remember that we still are living at those years in the hacienda time. In the hacienda time, it means that you serve the patron. And if you are thinking to change that way of life, you should be jailed, you should be punished. And now Cipriano Titirica many times was punished because he was speaking justice at that time. So the Methodist approach to the indigenous people it was 1930s through until 1950s, through the missionaries and through the local leadership in Ancoraimes, which erupted later on as a contribution. And then, of course, the Aymara movement in before the 1985, when we elected this bishop from Uruguay and all that. So I think I would say there are positive things as a church into the Aymara in the region of the Ancoraimes, especially for the women, the girls' school. Now, it doesn't mean. Now, what is perfection? Perfection. I don't know. I cannot talk about it. What it was good at that time, I would say the goodness of those things. Well, there was no education for girls. The Methodists opened the school. There were no teachers for the indigenous peoples. The Methodist Church decided those who graduated from primary school, 6th grade, can become teachers, and then all the communities got the teachers. These are the contributions. Now, how did they lift up the local identity and local vision of life or cosmovision, whatever? Perhaps that was not very strong in those times. It was mostly North American way understanding and also the Western way of understanding until 75?
75, 76.
When the Aymara movement came.
Then with the Aymara movement, I know that, for example, you couldn't use indigenous instruments. Before that, you couldn't use indigenous instruments in worship, like the pan flute and the animal skin drums. You had to use the accordion, Western style music. The music was Western style. And one of the first things that happened when it became indigenous was the development of an Aymara and Quechua hymnal, with hymns in Aymara and Quechua and using indigenous instruments. So does that play a role, you think, of recognizing the value of indigenous music and indigenous culture? And I would think that played a critical role in saying that indigenous music is just as sacred as Western music. Around 2000, 2004, 2005, you were back in Bolivia, and you were at Ancoraimes, and you were doing some things in terms of voter education and some of those kinds of things, weren't you? Were you involved in some of that? Why was that necessary? To teach about education and those kinds of things to the indigenous people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I returned from USA, Bishop Mamani, I would return back a little bit. Mamani, I asked him if he could give me a job. And Bishop Mamani said, we don't have a position here. We don't have a space. And the University of La Paz invited me to teach English at the university. What a good salary. And I said to Zacarias, I have a job at the university, but I would like to work in the church. And Zacarias said to me, but there's no money to pay the salary, anything like that. The only place that you can go and you try something is in Ancoraimes. So I went back to Ancoraimes. And when I started there,
now this was the school that you attended, right? This is the school where you went to, where you got your elementary education.
That's right. That's
and then
where
you became the principal of the school.
Yeah, and then I went back there, and then when I came back here, and I said to the people this: we need to speak our Aymara, we need to play our music, our flutes, all these kind of things that we do, and we should be proud of it, blah, 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 blah. I went there, I showed the pictures in different communities, and we should speak Aymara. But some people would come up to me, yes, you want us to speak Aymara only, and you speak Spanish, Aymara, and English. teach us English to us. We don't want to speak Aymara. Oh my God, I didn't have authority to say, because then of course I spoke English already. Then these kind of things was a debate in between the people. The reasons that we should be proud ourselves to speak our language, our ways of understanding, our music, our ways of using the garments that we have. And so I started to wear the wool-mated shirts, pants, and here I can tell you a story too. This is Hans Obliger from Sweden, came as a technician, and he was without shoes, doing barefoot. And people would come up to me, oh, you're nothing to him because you have sandals at least, but this gringo doesn't have a shoes. You're supposed to be, well, kind of, it's a story. But anyway, the reason, not me only, but a lot of leaders, women and men, decided in those days in our workshops in different stages, said, we have to love ourselves first, then love others too, and love our own things too. That's the way we have to can grow. That's when we started already. Until then, I came out to Sweden, to Switzerland, and went back to the Bolivian country, and I came back as an ambassador too. We continue to say. So every year on All Saint Days, which is November, I stay with my own community, playing the flutes and all that. And then the younger people will look at me and this guy still plays. Well, we should be playing. I think you have to show it. In other words, if you say only, yeah, it's okay. But if you do it and you speak for it, it has more impact. So that way, that still continues to be proud in some area. Not, I don't want to say I'm responsible for that, but there are a lot of people who support it. And for instance, the Wipala is on a flag there.
Right.
One day I made it, this Wipala understanding in workshops and all that. I took it to Tiwanaku to show it. Said, this is what we are represented as a peoples, not only one kind, all kinds of people. And then suddenly at the end of the ceremony, the Wipala was lost. Somebody stolen. And then 2 months later, it was hanging on the Plaza Murillo, and on one of those workshops that I hold it up and said, this is the Wipala from our office. Yes, but it was visiting the communities. But you don't suppose this is ours. Wow. This is the way in which we promoted our way of self-esteem, our own history, our belief that we can be different, but also at the same time together with others.
Oh, that's great. What's the dangers of the young indigenous people losing their culture? What dangers does that present for them and for the future?
One of the dangers is the way we talking now, the technology.
Yeah.
Today, the technology is no secret anymore, at least at my understanding. It is a time, I compare to my younger age, when I was 10 or 11, 12 years old, my brother used to say, you're supposed to have a good voice because you're going to be leader, then you have to call to the meeting. And you're supposed to know the wind, which way it blows. And you're supposed to know the day in which you're going to do that, how the sun comes out. Then you call to the meeting. Okay. Of course, they knew about it. If the wind blows from the left or from the center, whatever, you're supposed to put your voice in direction or behind that so your voice could be heard in the whole region. Okay, today the technology doesn't care about it. I think you're supposed to have the antenna. Doesn't matter which way they blow. Then this is one of the dangers for these cultural things. Now, we the younger generation should be how to use these instruments today. That is one of the dangers, very, very bad for even politicians. Today, nothing is secret anymore.
Yeah.
Now, they know everything. and so, which is good and bad. Of course, everything is good and bad, but at least there should be some careful selection which will strengthen the life itself in the world. This is one thing. The other thing is, through this communication way, the best costume or best thing which would be worse for us, you copy or you try to do things the similar way. But is it really true that can help or not? That's something that is not, we don't know. But those are the things that today technology is more dangerous as well as is good at the same time, but we have to know how to use it.
Good. In your autobiography, you spoke about how the indigenous approach to Earth and the environment provides some possible solutions to the growing ecological crisis of our planet. Could you speak to that? How does an indigenous approach to Earth differ from that of the majority culture, and how might that help bring some solutions to the ecological crisis that's coming before our world?
This is one of the very dangerous questions to me, because I no longer live in my community, Salcapampa, at which we practiced in my younger time. But I also visit some people. I also have this Chocalla place, then still is in mind. I think the land is the most important thing. It is which provides you your sustenance, your life is in it. And today the understanding to respect the land is not as it was in our times. You're supposed to be, first of all, reading the stations of the year, to be in contact with the animals that live, the birds, the germs, and all kind of things, the wind, the rain. Then you decide if you're going to plant potato or if you're going to plant barley or corn. Then your decision comes and says, this is the way it's telling us, the nature is telling us the way will happen. So we must be relating to them, and also coordination. Is there such coordination today? No more. Today, the means of money is more important than anything else. Today, if potato gives me more money, I have more potatoes. If maize gives me more money, money oriented today. Obviously, money buys also other things, but I hope that the understanding should say, yes, I need the potatoes, but I don't need 100 tons of potato. I need only 1 ton for my life. That's enough. No. Everybody wants to have more. But we are abusing the land, the earth. We're abusing. That is going to diminish us. I mean, it's going to destroy us. And who's going to be responsible? We, as a human beings. And I think every culture, every nation should be thinking in trying to educate their generations for the respect for the land, for the earth, for everything that sustains life. I don't think that is happening. Let me remember this. Long time ago, my father and my mother, we were taking care of the sheep and coming back in the afternoon, and we found eggs. I have found Fisan eggs, more or less, perdiz, about 6 of them. We are proud, home. Oh, God, we did. Tonight we're going to have a fried eggs or something, eggs. This is good. We come home, and after that, everything is taken care. We're cooking, and I said, we found these eggs. And then my father used to ask, how many eggs were there? We brought them, all of them. And we brought them 6 of them. There were 6 of them. And then he would stand and would say this, how in the hells did you bring all of them? You cannot do that. You're supposed to bring half of it maximum, because if you bring all that, tomorrow there will be no birds anymore. You're supposed to. This is the way of protection. Quite how come? So we were very much not good that night because we felt that our father was not good to us. But after that, we thought about it. Yes, he was right. If we diminish certain things, tomorrow we will not have. So I think that idea, I don't know if still is there. Now we do have all kind of productions. This technology, this kind of chemical things that we use to produce more to feed ourselves, of course, but then there should be some kind of balance, the balance of everything, the balance of sharing. But I don't think there is kind of idea of that yet. Hopefully there's going to be.
That's great. Is there anything else that you want to mention about? I mean, this is a chance to speak to people across the world. I don't know how many people will be listening, but about the role of Indigenous people and why this day is important. Anything else that you want to share about that?
Yeah, I think it is important we should always remember it, like the Christians we do. Every Christmas we remember. Every Christmas, although with a different kind of idea, but we remember the birth of a person, of a God, sons, whatever, but unites us first. Makes us to think if it really happened or not, what happens? Yes, one thing. Second thing, unites us the family, wherever we are. Even the cards come in with a phone call and blah, 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 brings us. Reminds us. I think more or less the same thing would happen, should be, for this Indigenous Day of Indigenous Peoples Day, because we Indigenous people are still there. We will still be there, and we do have something that we can contribute: the unification, the coordination, the harmony, the peace thing. I think the Indigenous peoples has that contribution can make today. But let us be open to the other cultures who are not Indigenous, open to listen, open to debate, open to be to have a dialogue and greet ourselves and respect each other. Now, I would say, as a Bolivian, I invite chuchuño, which is the dehydrated potatoes. Now, I might eat the Fiji's food, which is a sock of like a socket in YouTube.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but okay, let's eat those things. Let's enjoy it and respect ourselves. I think it is good to have the International Day of Indigenous Peoples to remember us and do our what is it? Thanks of prayer for every nation that we are here. So my greetings to my fellow Indigenous persons.
Very good. I want to thank you, Bishop, for your presence and sharing with this. And I want to share with the listeners that, like I said, we already have the first episode of the podcast is available on this website. And I hope you'll listen to that first podcast of Weaving the Blanket, which is in English, or the Tiendo el Aguayo, which is in Spanish. It starts with the story of the torture of a man who is working on behalf of Indigenous people and working for democracy in Bolivia by a right-wing dictator. It's a very powerful story of his torture. I'm a storyteller, and over the next 30 weekly episodes, I'll be sharing the life stories of some of the Bolivian Indigenous people and sacrifices they've made to bring equality and justice to the Indigenous people of Bolivia. And one of those stories, again, will be the story of the man before you, Eugenio Poma. The podcast is free. The English version is entitled Weaving the Blanket, and it's on iTunes, and also is available at the website of www.weavingtheblanket.com. The Spanish version is entitled Tiendo el Aguayo and is available at the website of www.tiendoelaguayo.com and on this Facebook page. Thank you very much, Bishop, and we will be in touch. And thank you
Okay.
very much, and I hope everyone will enjoy
Okay.
enjoy this podcast.
Greetings to everybody there in Oklahoma or wherever you are.
Okay, thank you.